I'm pleased today to be able to welcome my colleagues Eduardo Kohn and Adriana Camisar to our discussion. Eduardo joins us from Montevideo, Uruguay, and Adriana from Salta, Argentina. Welcome to you both. Eduardo, let's start with you. There have been a number of elections, very active political scene recently in Latin America, and perhaps you can give us an overview of some of the political changes that might impact relations with Israel.
Yes, Chile has made an impact. The diplomatic incident created by current President Boric suspending in the last minute the presentation of credentials of the Israeli ambassador was insulting, and the diplomatic excuses never came from the president himself. Chile is voting any resolution against Israel in UN agencies. It happened before, but never 100%. President Boric announced his hostility before he became president, and now, when he's in office, he's keeping his word and creating uneasiness for the Jewish community. Even though the new Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, is leftist and is making controversial political changes in Colombia, the UN voting record so far is not as many observers could have expected, because Colombia is mostly abstaining and the bilateral relationship with Israel is cordial. Petro and President Herzog had a good bilateral meeting in the World Summit that took place in Egypt a short time ago. We will have to see what may happen when Lula takes office on January 1st. In his previous mandates, two previous mandates, he was not friendly with Israel, and he accused Israel of genocidal and did not blast Hamas for its terrorist aggressions against Israeli civilians. Let's see what will happen in the next future. Last, Honduras has many political and economic unrest since Mrs. Xiomara Castro became a president. She announced almost immediately that early this year she would move the embassy from Jerusalem, but it hasn't happened yet. And the UN voting record has moved from supporting Israel 100%, as the last president did all the time, to mostly abstentions. So as we can see, it's a very diverse panorama.
Adriana, speaking about relations with Israel, which we follow very closely, the two of you launched an interview series this year focused on Latin America, and most of the episodes dealt with the region's relationship with Israel. Tell us more about that, who you've had on as guests, and what you plan in the future.
Yes, of course. And we've launched this year an interview series called Lens on Latin America, or Con el Lente en Latinoamérica in Spanish, which focuses on this important region. And as you said, most of the episodes dealt with relations with Israel. And we've had, for example, the wonderful opportunity to interview Jonathan Peled, the Deputy Director General for Latin America at the Israeli Foreign Ministry, who gave us an overview of the state of the relations with the entire region. We've also interviewed Marina Rosenberg, the former Israeli ambassador to Chile. And this was an extremely interesting interview because of the challenging situation there under the new government, as Eduardo mentioned. And I'd like to also mention the last interview we did a few weeks ago with Ambassador Zvi Tal, the current ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to Mexico. We did this interview to commemorate the 70 years of diplomatic relations between Israel and Mexico, and it was a wonderful opportunity to learn more about the history of the relations between these two great countries. And then we are learning a lot in this interview, so I strongly encourage those who are interested in Latin America to watch them, because we not only discuss relations between Israel and the countries of Latin America, not just the relations between the governments, but also the relations between the people, which makes these conversations even more interesting. Another issue we've touched upon is the state of anti-Semitism in the region, which is something that always worries us. And in that context, we've interviewed Fernando Lotenberg, the first commissioner to monitor and combat anti-Semitism in the Americas, designated by the Organization of American States, the OAS. And Fernando is doing a truly outstanding job at encouraging countries to adopt the IRA anti-Semitism definition and at confronting anti-Semitic trends coming both from the right and the left in Latin America. And finally, of course, in some of these interviews, we've discussed Iran's dangerous activities in the region, something that we always monitor very closely. So again, I encourage everybody to watch them. They are in Spanish, but they have English subtitles because we wanted to make them available to as many people as possible.
Well, we're very proud of the fact that we have this program and it is in the Spanish language. Of course, there are many Jewish communities in Latin America. Relationship between Israel and many Latin American countries goes back really to 75 years, going back to the reestablishment of the State of Israel in 1948. So we appreciate all the work you do on this program. Speaking of the region and the UN, Eduardo, let's talk about GRULAC. GRULAC is an acronym. If you'd like, you can spell it out for us. The UN system, the international system, actually, diplomatic system is filled with acronyms. But for those who do not know, GRULAC is one of the 5 regional groups at the United Nations, composed of 33 member states from Latin America and the Caribbean. Is this group, when it acts, does it act in concert? Is everyone together on issues relating to Israel? Are there some countries that break away? We see that sometimes in the EU. When the EU does not demand discipline in voting, there are a number of countries that vote oftentimes with Israel and with the United States on Middle East-related issues. How does it work in GRULAC?
Well, as you say, GRULAC, which in Spanish is Grupo Latinoamericano, the Latin American group, is not monolithic today. Let's take an example. In the heinous and unacceptable resolution taken by the UN last November 30th, establishing that the UN will commemorate November 29th as the Nakba Day, very embarrassing, very shameful, not a statement but resolution, most Latin American countries abstained or voted against, like Guatemala, for example, voted against. But who voted for this insulting decision? Dictatorships like Cuba, Nicaragua, an authoritarian government very close to dictatorship like Bolivia, and unfortunately, Chile. So, as it happened this time, it is happening in general. There is not a monolithic blob, as it used to happen, for example, 15 years ago. But instead, there are different decisions taken according to the issues to be discussed. For example, Guatemala and Uruguay are receiving, in these recent times, heavy political pressures from some Arab League countries, supported mainly by Venezuela and Cuba, but they stay still. They have received the pressures not only in the UN, but in their own countries. Maybe there will be more pressures from Lula when he will take office in Brazil, as he used to do before, and maybe, we hope not, some countries will yield. But we will see. That is to be seen. GRULAC has lost the monolithic leftist strength it had 15, 20 years ago, when the leaders at that time of Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Ecuador, Brazil were pushing and pressing all the time for voting against Israel, all the time. Today, as I say, it's slightly different, but importantly different.
Yeah, well, I understand the issue of regional groups, but block voting to me has always been a negative because it just does not allow the freedom for governments that might be favorably inclined to kind of break from the pack. So it's good to hear that there are some cracks, at least in the voting. Adriana, given your work with our affiliate AJIRI, the American Jewish International Relations Institute, what can you tell us about the votes of Latin American countries when it comes to UN resolutions, the ones that AJIRI focuses on?
Then, as you know, AJIRI focuses on 2 entities that form what we call the anti-Israel propaganda apparatus at the UN Secretariat. These entities are the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People and the Division for Palestinian Rights, also known as DPR. These entities, whose continued funding is reauthorized every year by the vote of member states at the General Assembly, work all year long to promote the idea that Israel is a racist state and that the very creation of Israel was a racist endeavor. And they do so with UN funds and in the name of the UN, which is outrageous. And most importantly, these two entities endorse the so-called right of return of the more than 5 million people of Palestinian ancestry who are still wrongly considered refugees by the UN to what is now the state of Israel. And why I say wrongly considered refugees? Because less than 1% of these people are actual refugees from Israel's 1948 War of Independence. The other 1999 are descendants of these refugees, and that is how the UN gets to the number of over 5 million. Now, this is truly unprecedented, it has no precedence in international law. The Palestinians are the only people in the world whose refugee status passes from generation to generation indefinitely. And this is how the refugee issue has been and continues to be used as a weapon against Israel. Now, as you can imagine, no Israeli government of any political sign would ever agree to the mass migration of more than 5 million Palestinians to Israel, because this would mean the destruction of Israel as a majority Jewish state, the only one in the world, and the creation of another Arab state from the river to the sea. So the insistence on the right of return places a serious obstacle to the achievement of a peaceful solution to the conflict, because it's really a zero-sum game. But as long as UN member states continue to endorse the right of return by reauthorizing the funding of these entities, the Palestinians will continue to believe that if they wait long enough, the UN will help them destroy Israel demographically and will have no incentives to enter into peace negotiations. This is why Algeria focuses on these resolutions, and this is why it will be so important for peace-loving nations to stop voting in favor of the continued funding of these entities. Now, you've asked about the vote of the Latin American countries, and Eduardo already said something about this. The vote on these particular resolutions took place a few days ago on November 30th, and we've had mixed results because of the political changes in the region that Eduardo mentioned. We've had some bad news. For example, Honduras and Colombia used to vote against these resolutions and in favor of Israel. Now they decided to abstain, which is not that good. Brazil and Guatemala fortunately kept voting against. The Dominican Republic used to vote in favor and now switched to abstaining. And then we have Argentina, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, and Uruguay abstaining, and Bolivia, Chile, Cuba, Ecuador, El Salvador, Nicaragua, the regular suspects voting in favor and against Israel. Venezuela, in this case, was absent. And there are many different ways to read this. And Costa Rica was a special case this year because the current government gave instructions to its UN representative to abstain on both resolutions. The instructions were apparently not followed entirely, and Costa Rica ended up voting in favor of one, as in previous years, and abstaining on the other one. What is interesting is that the government later on requested that the official record makes note of the fact that their intention was to abstain on both resolutions. This is the first time that I see this, and I think it's positive that they really wanted to rectify this vote in favor of Israel. So in general, we've got mixed results, and a lot of work is still ahead of us.
Eduardo, B'nai B'rith has brought to Israel journalists from several Latin American countries, including Argentina, Uruguay, Costa Rica, Panama, and Chile. The year before the pandemic started, and again this year, what's your assessment about the impact of these delegations? What kind of impact do they have? And has B'nai B'rith developed an ongoing relationship with these journalists once they get back to their home countries?
Yes, all these missions have had a great impact. B'nai B'rith World Center and his director, our dear colleague Alan Schneider, developed a very intensive program. And through the program, the journalists can watch with their own eyes the reality of Israel's daily life from north to south. They can watch Palestinian cities like Bethlehem, Arab-Israeli professionals whom they meet, political leaders, religion, culture, high-tech, education. We can see the impact when they are in Israel on the ground and they send from the places they are visiting press notes, radio programs live, TV programs live. Then we can also watch the impact when they go back to their countries, and we continue reading and watching their programs. Very important, very important. After the trip, all of them start reporting on Israel issues the way they never did before, because they say, and I quote what they say, now we have been on the ground and we are aware of what is going on in this daily life that Israel has. It is very important the ongoing relationship B'nai Brit has developed with them. We were able to watch it in 2021, when Hamas attacked Israel, and those journalists immediately called their contacts that they have made in Israel through B'nai Brit, colleagues of them, journalists, and reported those journalists from Israel with a vision of those Israeli journalists. And this year, we have already been able to watch the same thing, of course, and thank you that it was not war, but when they also contacted the Israeli colleagues to report on the Israeli elections. Besides, we are in WhatsApp chat groups with each delegation, and we also care about the others, not only politics and notes and whatever. And there are salutations in Rosh Hashanah and secular New Year. It is not only a professional relationship, but a very friendly one and very productive for the result we were looking for from B'nai Brit.
Well, I know that the media is not something that is new to you. You have worked with it and in it for many years in your home country of Uruguay, writing many pieces for the newspapers and appearances on television. It's good experience, of course, that you apply to these very important journalists' visits. Adriana, the last question has to do with a case that we care deeply about and have for nearly 30 years. And that we follow it every day for many years, and that's the AMIA case. This most destructive act of terrorism in Argentina, on the soil of South America, far away from the Middle East, that really rocked not only Buenos Aires, but the entire Jewish world. What can you tell us about our ongoing efforts to get some measure of justice in this case?
Dan, as you know, the evidence against the Iranians in this case is overwhelming, but Argentina has no way to put the accused on trial because the Iranian regime, of course, will never hand over the suspects to Argentina. This is why for a number of years now, we have advocated for Argentina to adopt the trial in absentia procedure so that the accused can be put on trial even if they continue to refuse to appear before the Argentine courts. We believe that a condemnatory ruling in absence would facilitate the maintenance of the Interpol red alerts that the accused currently have against them, and would also strengthen eventual extradition requests if they manage to travel. I'd like to mention that in July this year, we've marked the 28th anniversary of the bombing with a Zoom program, a very extensive program advocating for the adoption of the trial in absentia procedure in Argentina. And we've had important personalities endorsing our request, including Elizabeth Odio Benito, the former president of the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, and Stuart Eisenstadt, current U.S. Special Advisor on Holocaust issue. He was speaking on his personal capacity. There are a few bills in Argentina, in the Argentine Congress, that promote this idea, but so far they are just sleeping in Congress, Dan. So we hope that the Argentine parliamentarians take this issue on their hands this time and make it a reality so that Argentina can finally put the accused on trial and can make it possible for the relatives of the victims and for the public in general to know the truth after so many years of impunity.
Well, hopefully the in absentia initiative that you are spearheading and that others are supporting and endorsing will lead to that measure of justice to the victims and their families. I want to thank both of you for joining me today from South America. We very much appreciate all the work that you do, and good luck to you both going forward.
Thank you very much.